Hi, my name is Miranda Stern, and as Josh mentioned, I'm a Housing Program Specialist in Public Housing's Management and Occupancy Division. I am happy to present today on the new form, HUD 5880, which is the Flat Rent Market Analysis Tool. During the presentation today, we will be providing training on the following topics: flat rent setting options, a high-level overview of flat rent exception requests, benefits of the new Form 5880, and an overview of the Flat Rent Market Analysis Tool, including how to use the guides, worksheets, and summary sheet. For families that choose to pay the flat rent, PHAs have three options to set their flat rent. PHAs can set an FMR-based flat rent at no less than the lower of 80% of the FMR or 80% of the small area FMR or unadjusted rent when applicable. If a PHA provides utility allowances, the FMR-based rent should be 80% of the FMR minus the utility allowance. Flat rents are always inclusive of utility allowances. If either of these two options do not reflect PHA local market conditions, the PHA may request an exception flat rent based on a local market analysis. Note, rents derived from the market study are set at 100% of the local market. So PHAs are only required to submit a flat rent exception request if they are setting flat rents at lower than 80% of the FMR, small area FMR, or unadjusted rent. If the PHA does not believe a rent based on their FMR or unadjusted rent is reflective of the local market analysis, the PHA may submit an exception flat rent based on the PHA-produced market analysis. If a PHA chooses to set an exception flat rent, there are two submission streams: new submissions and extensions. PHAs have 90 days from the effective date of the new FMRs to submit an extension request. Starting with the fiscal year 2020 submission cycle, all PHAs who submit a new flat rent exception request are required to use the Public Housing Flat Rent Exception Request Market Analysis Tool, Form HUD 5880. If a PHA cannot provide sufficient information after two requests for additional information from HUD, HUD will deny the request. If a PHA's flat rent exception request is denied, the PHA must set its flat rents using an applicable FMR. The updated flat rents must be applied to any intake or reexamination that takes effect 60 days after the flat rent exception request denial date. The other submission stream is for a PHA to extend previously approved flat rents. Flat rent exception requests must be approved by HUD on an annual basis unless the PHA requests an extension. A PHA may request an extension of a previously approved exception flat rent under the following three circumstances. 1. The market study accompanying the previously approved request is no more than 2 years old. 2. The local market conditions remain unchanged. And 3. The PHA submits the extension request to HUD no later than 90 days after the effective date of the final FMRs or unadjusted rents, which, as previously discussed, the deadline is typically December 31st. Now, if during the 2-year renewal period the PHA becomes aware of a change in local market conditions that would impact the market, such as a new large business corporation moving to the area, or if a major employer closes its business, the PHA must discontinue the use of the current flat rent exception and establish rents based on an FMR-based flat rent, or conduct a new market analysis and submit a new flat rent exception request to HUD for approval. If the PHA chooses to conduct a new market analysis and submits Form HUD 5880, the PHA may continue to use the current flat rent exception until HUD issues a decision. The new required form, HUD 5880 Flat Rent Market Analysis Tool, is required for PHAs to receive a flat rent exception. The new tool was developed to save PHA's resources in our current budget environment. In 2019, PHMOD performed a random sampling of exception request submissions. This reveals an average payment of around $1,000 to contractors for the preparation of a market analysis. The tool is user-friendly, and it calculates proposed market rents based on user inputs. It streamlines the submission process and adds uniformity to the review protocol. Once completed, it's extremely easy to update for submitting subsequent flat rent exception requests. Additionally, HUD staff will be available for training and technical assistance. The tool is available for download in the training, but it may also be downloaded at the link provided. It may be helpful to open the tool and explore as we discuss how it's used, but don't worry about writing this link down, as it will be included in a follow-up email received after the training. The tool consists of 3 guides, which are instructions on how to use the worksheets and complete the market bedroom guides. 2 worksheets, rent adjustment worksheet where the PHA enters the amount of adjustment per amenity, utility worksheet to input utility allowances and any utilities included in the rent, and market studies for bedroom sizes 1 through 6. In these tabs, the user fills out a profile of amenities for the PHA property, also known as the subject property, and then for the 3 market rate comparable units. The tool will then create an adjusted rent for all 3 comparables and average them together to find a market-based exception flat rent. Finally, summary sheet pulls in all information from any completed bedroom study. Once the PHA understands how to use the tool, the PHA then completes an adjustment worksheet and utilities worksheet. Depending on what bedroom sizes are included in the study, the PHA then completes an amenity profile for the PHA unit and 3 local comparables for those units. The summary sheet then populates with the proposed flat rents and FMR-based flat rents. Each property requesting an exception flat rent should have a separate form HUD 5880. In order for the property information on the summary sheet to populate, at least 1 bedroom study must be completed. On the left-hand side of the slide is a sample of what a summary sheet will look like at the end of this process. Only bedroom sizes with completed studies will appear in the proposed flat rent monthly table. For example, if studies were completed for 1 through 4 bedroom units, then studies for studio, 5-bedroom, and 6-bedroom would populate with NA or non-applicable. Before the market comparison analysis can begin, all applicable adjustments must be set in the adjustment worksheet. The study only needs to include adjustments for amenities that apply to the local market. There's also a space to write in amenities if applicable. PHA writing categories and adjustments will be used to populate the rest of the flat rent market analysis tool. So what do we mean by amenity? An amenity is a feature included in the unit that a tenant may consider when renting an apartment, referred to as a category in this market analysis. Adjustments for amenities are made based on the local market value of the amenity. Please note, the adjustment factors provided in the instructions are not suggested. The numbers are solely included for demonstration purposes. Actual adjustment factors should be based on local market conditions. Any numbers that you see in this presentation are only for sample purposes, so don't worry about writing any of them down. To complete the adjustment worksheet, users must determine how much each category of real estate amenity is worth in terms of monthly rent for their community. For example, how much additional rent would an average tenant pay for additional bathrooms, a dishwasher, a garbage disposal, central AC, and so forth? Please note that it is not required to use every listed category in a market study. A user may only include amenities that are relevant to their local market. Also, the numbers included here, again, are only examples, and also all of the examples that we used are written into the guides in the tool, so you will see them again. To use the adjustment worksheet, input how much each amenity would adjust the monthly rent for each applicable category. If the category does not apply, leave blank. When completing the form, a user should analyze how much more should one expect to pay for an apartment with an in-unit washer-dryer than an identical apartment without this amenity. All adjustments are made in terms of monthly rent. For example, monthly rent for an apartment that includes a parking space might cost $20 per month more than an identical apartment with street parking. Let's look at year built or renovated adjustment. When comparing the age of two properties, the dollar amount entered into the rent adjustment workbook will be used to adjust the rent for each year of difference. In this example, if a PHA property was built in 1980 and a comparable property was built in 2000, there is a 20-year difference. We entered an adjustment of 35 cents per year of difference. Thus, the analysis will multiply 20 years by the 35-cent adjustment, resulting in a $7 monthly rent adjustment. When comparing the square footage of two properties, the amount entered in the rent adjustment workbook will be used to adjust the rent for each 10 square feet of difference. For example, if the PHA property was 1,000 square feet and the comparable property was 1,200 square feet, there is a difference of 200 square feet. In our example, we are adjusting by $1 per 10 square feet. Thus, the analysis will multiply 200 square feet by $1 and then divide by 10, resulting in a $20 adjustment. To adjust for differences in bathrooms between the subject and comparable properties, enter in how much an extra half or full bath would adjust the monthly rent. For example, if the PHA property had one full bath and the comparable property had one full bath and one half bath, the adjustment would be $25. AC is another type of amenity that adjusts based on different scenarios. For example, if the value of AC Central is set at $18 and the value of AC through the wall window is set at $13, then if the PHA property has AC through the wall or window and the comparable unit has Central, there is an incremental difference between the values and the analysis would adjust by $5. If the PHA property has no AC and the comparable property unit has AC Central, the adjustment would reflect the full value of the difference. The analysis would adjust by $18. Access to laundry is valued at different amounts. Depending on the difference between the scenarios, the amenity will also adjust incrementally. For example, if the value of the washer-dryer in-unit is set at $12 and the value of laundry room on-site is set at $7, then if the PHA has a laundry room on-site and the comparable unit has a washer and dryer in-unit, there is an incremental difference between the values. This analysis would adjust by $5. If the PHA has laundry room on-site and the comparable unit has none, the adjustment would reflect the full value of the difference. In this analysis, it would adjust by $7. As I mentioned earlier, PHAs have the ability to write in amenities that are not already included in the study. To utilize this feature, PHAs must include a description of the category and the adjustment amount. This will auto-populate the category within Section C of the Bedroom Market Studies. In Example 1, the local market has no available units with the same number of bedrooms to compare. This adjustment could be applied to compare a one-bedroom to a zero-bedroom market rate unit. Or, in another example, an adjustment could be applied to units that are in close proximity to a bus or rail line. These categories may be used as needed to adjust for differences in the market. Utilities are factored into the study in multiple ways. Utilities that are or aren't included in the rent affect a tenant's total out-of-pocket expenses. Thus, a user must assess what utilities are or aren't included in the subject and comparable rents. Only utilities included in the rent for either the subject or comparable units will result in adjustments to the monthly rent and have an effect on the proposed flat rent. Utility allowances are only used to determine a PHA's FMR-based flat rent. HUD only needs to approve an exception flat rent if it's lower than 80% of the FMR, small area FMR, or unadjusted rent minus utility allowances. Please note, we are looking for differences between the PHA and market units. So, for example, if the PHA unit in every rental unit pays for trash, meaning there is no variation. Don't worry about estimating the amount. If there is no variation between the study and the PHA does not need to fill in the cost. For example, if all PHA units and markets include trash collection, then it is not necessary to estimate the dollar value of the service. Users must assess how much each type of utility is worth in terms of monthly rent for each applicable bedroom size in their particular community. For each utility type, electric, gas, water, garbage, input how much each utility would adjust the monthly rent. If the category does not apply, leave blank. Because utility consumption will increase as the size of units increase, include the adjustment amounts for each applicable bedroom size. Then the user would refer to their utility allowance schedule and input the total utility allowance amounts for each applicable bedroom size. Again, if it's not applicable, leave blank. The calculations using the utility allowance will appear on the summary sheet, which we will look at a little later in the presentation. Now that both the adjustment and utilities worksheets have been completed, the user must create profiles for both the PHA and 3 comparables. To calculate proposed flat rent per month, users must fill in all shaded blue boxes for the PHA subject property, as well as the characteristics of 3 comparable units in that community. Using the drop-down menus, select characteristics of each property. If applicable, use the drop-down menu to change to Yes in order to indicate the unit has that feature. Complete the first and second sections with identifying information for the PHA subject property and 3 comparable units. The PHA property information included in this section will populate the summary sheet. The user is also required to put in property information for the 3 comparables: street address, city, state, monthly rent. Monthly rent is the actual rent for the comparable units and must be entered in to include that property in this analysis. Include utility unit types such as single family, duplex, apartment, townhouse, mobile home. Each box must be checked to confirm that each comparable unit is unsubsidized. Again, for Section A, select the characteristics of each property. Each amenity is initially set to N. Using the drop-down menu, you can change the amenity to Yes in order to indicate that the unit includes that feature. For year built or renovated, enter the year, and for square footage area, enter the square footage for each property. Depending on the selection, a positive, negative, or no adjustment may result. For particular amenities such as number of bathrooms, AC unit type, laundry, the user will not make a yes or no choice, but will select from a multiple choice drop-down. The adjustments for these selections will correspond with the adjustment worksheet. For Section B, Services and Utilities, select Yes or No for the PHA subject property and 3 comparable units, and adjustments will autofill from the Utilities worksheet. Section D, Adjustment Calculations and Rent per Month, performs the analysis of adjusting the monthly rent based on the PHA and comparable profiles. These rows should autofill based on the previously entered information. Actual rent is the same as monthly rent, previously entered in Section 2 for each comparable. The total adjustments adds up the sum of all adjustments made for each comparable property. Adjusted rent is actual rent minus total adjustments, and the proposed flat rent is the average of the 3 comparable adjusted rents. Line 36 and 37 in Section D are used to calculate the FMR-based flat rent. The PHA should determine what the FMR is for their county and bedroom size that corresponds to the study and enter it into line 36. Next, the PHA should determine whether the small area FMR or unadjusted rent is applicable. Once they have found that information, it should be entered into line 37. Finally, the summary sheet. The summary sheet will auto-populate with information from the Utilities worksheet and any completed market studies. Please note, at least one bedroom study must be completed for the summary sheet to populate. If a bedroom study is not applicable and thus left blank, it will appear as non-applicable or NA on the summary sheet. So again, for example, if studies were completed for 1 bedroom through 4 bedroom units, studio, 5 bedroom, 6 bedroom units would populate with NA. The summary sheet pulls in information from various locations within the tool. This guide may be helpful when troubleshooting. For instance, if the FMR is not populating correctly, check line 36 and 37 of the applicable bedroom study to make sure information has been entered incorrectly. I included a few other scenarios that you might find, so you can come back and reference this slide as needed. And that concludes our training. So thank you for your time today. If you have any additional questions after our Q&A, feel free to send an email to the FlatRent inbox at the email address provided, or you can contact anybody listed on the FlatRent team.